Greetings to baristas. Well, I got into a conversation with a working class U.S. conservative the other night, and I received a very clear insight into the psychology of such folks. Aside from appeals to religion, race, and nationalism, the money power behind the Tea Party movement makes grassroots inroads by class war rhetoric of its own, pitting good, hard-working Christian folks against corrupt liberal elites who live degenerate lifestyles of sodomy and drug use, sponging off the taxpayer. While that's an old story, this man launched into a diatribe of the boss is right because he's the boss. Thanks to his drive and knowledge, companies are created that gives the little guy work. But, I say, doesn't that at least make the big guy and the little guy equal partners, since he can't have a company without workers? No, I heard back, because the boss is risking his money to make the company. It's his property. It works or not based on his expertise, and so he should be the one calling the shots. But I insisted, since he can't do so without cooperation from the larger society, and this means the banks from which he derives his startup capital, who are lending out general depositors money, and the public from which he recruits his employees and consumers of his products, make that his in air quotes, not to mention the infrastructure supported by general tax revenue, his decisions need to be made in partnership with society, which is represented by elected officials, however poorly, as per my last video, and public agencies. No, indeed, my reactionary proletarian compañero shot back. His property rights supersede any such common interests. But if he fails alone. Therefore, if he succeeds, he should succeed alone. Well, this ideology fails, and for several reasons. First of all, as we saw 4 years ago when the big boss men fell, they didn't fall alone. They crashed everyone around them who depended on their expertise and knowledge. What's more, their crash is cushioned because they're too big to fail, we're told, while the trusting little guy, like my friend, is left stewing in shit at the bottom of the bowl. Then, of course, it's the government's fault for leaving him there, after first telling us that the government has no business getting in the way to prevent his predicament in the first place. But beyond that obvious contradiction, the marriage of capitalism and democracy, as personified by this man, fails for more fundamental reasons. When I explained these to him, he fell back on race cards and Obama, changing the subject, proof that my argument was bullshit proof. If we're to believe his idea that the capitalist knows best and deserves to rule the worker and dictate to the consumer because of his superior knowledge, then it follows we don't need elected government either. After all, who knows government better than a king, trained from childhood to administer the realm under his ownership? Why have politicians and the public gum things up by putting in their ignorant 2 kopecks worth? Who are the ignorant rabble to be deciding issues of taxation, war, or peace? As for religion, it follows that he has no business deciding for himself what the Word of God is, based on his translated Bible, because he hasn't been trained in church law or possesses any knowledge of ancient Hebrew or Greek on which his sacred scriptures are based. His theology is thoroughly second-hand and derivative. So who is he to be searching said Holy Writ to tell others what's scriptural or not? He has no right to be reading these sacred texts in the first place. After all, he's not allowed to practice medicine or law without a peer-reviewed license, is he? And as a believing Christian, he knows the miracles and words of the Lord take precedence over secular professions, so even higher standards should apply. So if workers have no right to tell the boss what to do, then subjects have no right to tell the king what to do, or common believers the right to talk back or argue with the priest or the rabbi. And so you see where his ideology leads, right back to feudalism, and his boss-man theory of economics never left it in the first place. This shows plainly why capitalism and democracy, like slavery and republicanism, are not compatible and never can be. A second point I got into it with him over was guns. Of course, the National Rifle Association is subsidized by the gun lobby, whose funders like Remington and Colt and etc. tend to make big bucks by turning every North American household into an armory. But there's a political agenda at work in its interpretation of the Second Amendment, which explains why conservatives are big on guns. The explosion in NRA membership, pun intended, was as a backlash in the 1960s and paranoia by working-class white folks in the suburbs and countryside against ghetto riots. The communists had obviously stirred up the ignorant black masses into making civil war inside the USA, so right-wing demagogues quickly stepped in urging citizens to arm themselves and fortify their homes. Gunmakers' profits took off, and so did the Second Amendment movement. This was created consciously by conservatives to prevent any would-be North American Che Guevaras from creating a militia home guard out of armed average citizens who could be mobilized in minutes' notice, just like the predecessors at Concord, when the Negroes and Marxists take full power in the cities. This militia home guard, created by conservatives consciously, as I've said, is thus to be a reserve army to be used to round up liberals and progressives and commies and minority leaders and union leaders and gays and Democrats in general when the right is forced to save the country by taking full power. Making sure the right has more guns in their homes is to give them the edge in the coming civil war when civil society breaks down, thanks to them in no small part. So, I said back to him, obviously we should place as many guns in the hands of minorities and liberals and Marxists as possible. Not American-made weapons, so U.S. gun capitalists won't profit on our need, but through the free market in firearms from China, Russia, Israel, and other cool places like that, so that we can fight back. After all, if the workers in Chile had been armed in 1973 under the elected Marxist regime of Salvador Allende, no right-wing dictatorship could have taken power like a hot knife in butter. And if blacks in Dixie had been armed according to their Second Amendment rights, they'd have won their voting and other rights all that much sooner, right? It wouldn't have been just the boys in white doing the discharging of firearms on pine-scented country roads. Well, to baristas, you could hear the flip-flopping a mile away like a prize fish ripped from the river and thrown on deck. More belly-up twisting than even a Mitt Romney speech. The Second Amendment was meant to protect constitutional government, I was told, not overthrow it, so subversive types like I mentioned had no more right to gun ownership than convicted felons. But what if constitutional government was in the hands of right-wing dictators? Then it couldn't be constitutional, could it? Impossible, said he, since conservatives knew better than to overthrow what they already owned. So again we came back to the first point. The constituted government should belong only to those who own. Those who don't own don't have the right to defend their freedom or deserve freedom to defend. And so by gun lobby logic, we return to property and arms for a self-constituted aristocracy, the essence of feudalism. So you see why right-wing anarchists and populists fail in tests of logic and need reinforcement by blind faith and prejudice to push their agenda, which is to support the boss man and his money up to and including private armed force. And that didn't take long. Hello? V.I. Lenin? Why are you butting in on a video about the gun-loving, boss-loving American proletariat? Just to say that you like the idea of Second Amendment arms in the hands of the popular masses? That the United States National Rifle Association propagandists have obviously been reading your major work on state and revolution. Yeah, but didn't you create a totalitarian state and stuff once your party seized power through popular armed force in the streets? That's what the NRA hopes to prevent by doing exactly the same thing if they have to. Good thing we're not brainwashed by left-wing propaganda around here.